I had the opportunity to have a wonderful conversation with the John Astin, who doesn't really need an introduction. John is sharp, he's intuitive, and he is filled to the gills with wisdom. In this particular conversation, you will see that it's quite an interesting ride, and he really does hit the nail on the head a few times. Hopefully you will find some insights here as well. And as always, please go ahead and leave any questions in the comments and enjoy this interview.
Let's just chat.
Sounds good.
I usually come into the first question is like, what has this awakening journey been like for you? What has it been all about?
That's a nice, easy question to answer. I'm happy to take a crack at it. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. Well, my awakening journey, what has it been about? I'll say first thing that comes to my mind is that I never would have imagined where I presently seem to find myself, that this is where it would have ended up. Not all of my ideas about that seemed to kind of prompt my initial searching as a 19-year-old were things related to self-realization and enlightenment and God realization. I think as part of that, things like peace of mind, and it was fueling that curiosity as a young man. But I didn't know that it would drop me headfirst into where I find myself now, which is not knowing, basically. That's a surprise. It's a big surprise.
Big shift of reference.
Yeah, it's like all of my ideas about spirituality have been cast into the flames of reality. Honestly, really does feel that way. I mean, the clue is there in the first book that I ever wrote about it, coming out of, what I would say was sort of some seminal experiences that I had about 20 years ago. And the book is called Too Intimate for Words, and that sums it up in a way, that what was dawning on me about the nature of this, I just couldn't encapsulate in any of my ideas or concepts or language. So I decided to try to write a book about that. Isn't that fun?
That's a great practice.
I seem to be very much engaged in that crazy undertaking of attempting to communicate about this. I can't seem to help myself. So of course, it is funny how, even though this can't be encapsulated in words, words seem to be potentially quite powerful as a evocateur or a doorway or catalyst into understanding the limitations of words, paradoxically, ironically.
Yeah.
So I think even though I initially, with the teachings that I was in, and I went through a number of different sort of explorations along these many, many years now, kind of starting off with more of a traditional kind of Raja Yoga, a la Yogananda's teaching, and almost became a monk in that whole realm of exploration. Didn't, fortunately, because that was not my calling, and became a bit disenchanted with elements of the kind of the structure of that teaching and the organization, and felt, I don't know, had some rigidities to it that didn't quite align for me. And plus I was inspired to teach the meditation, but I couldn't within that teaching because it was basically secret. It could only be taught by the monks and nuns. And I was also at around that same time was going back to college, having taken a couple of years off, and I wanted to take my passion at the time about meditative exploration and apply it to the academy and to my studies. So I wanted to research meditation, and this was just the beginning, kind of, in many ways, of that whole contemplative science, as they call it, studying meditation and related practices. And so I needed to find a meditation that I could study, that wasn't secret. And so I found my way gravitating to the whole kind of mindfulness world. And something about that felt a little bit more, I think there was an element of the yoga teaching I was involved in that I intuited as being a kind of not denial of the human dimension of experience, but it felt wonderfully transcendental in its emphasis. But in that, I felt there was some kind of traditional, I felt sort of baggage from that tradition, or at least that's how I interpreted it, of kind of rejection of the human dimension. Something about it I didn't have it really that articulated at the time, but it was like, it felt somehow a bit off to me for my taste. It was something about the mindfulness that felt a little bit more embracing of the whole human experience as well. So I got very involved in that as a researcher in that whole world of mindfulness and taught it. And even though I'd been throughout this journey, now we're talking like it's almost like a couple decades into this exploring and practice of meditation, principally being my idea that this is what I needed to be engaging in to wake up and realize the nature of reality. I actually didn't really care for meditation very much. I struggled with it, honestly. It felt like a battle a lot of the time. And I know I'm not alone in that experience.
Was it the classic battle? Was it the thought battle?
Yeah, battling my mind. My mind wanted to wander, and I thought that was not okay. And my job was to sort of rein it in and get the wild monkey under control, and the monkey mind. And I was like, yeah, I really didn't want to be controlled. And so I would often, I had moments, what I would call sort of meditative breakthroughs, where I had insights and discoveries, but a lot of it was a battle. And then I happened upon a kind of more of a non-dual sort of teacher who, at least he'd been inspired by non-duality in a kind of more of the effortless sort of approach to this, more direct approach, like, hey, this is already here, kind of drop the search, that invitation to realize that. And I don't know, it was just the right timing. And yeah, that sort of discovery dawned on me that everything I've been looking for was already here. 2 decades worth of intensive sort of searching was like, holy cow, like I am the very thing I've been looking for. Like, wow, that was a head spin.
That's the paradox too, is it's already been here. It's always been here. And seems as if that little journey was also part of it. It
seems like it. Yeah, it certainly was. It was my journey. You could say, right? Whether or not it was necessary. Some people ask me that, well, because now I'm teaching in a different sort of spirit of like, yeah, it's here, you don't have to go through all this arduous, it's not a requirement. People say, well, that's easy for you to say because you went through all of that. And I said, well, I don't really know. I don't know. I make no assumptions about what's needed in terms of one's path, like as if I could possibly know what somebody needs,
Well, to share a little bit about, it was one meeting, one meditation with Angelo, had no idea about meditation at all, had no idea what non-duality was at all. And that was it.
See, so there you go.
It's not a requirement yet. Here's the thing is that there is no other option for what we have done.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't be any other way.
So it really, there is some, we could point maybe to a formula, but there's still no formula.
No.
It's a paradox. There are things that we can do, but are we really doing them? It's just so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is the koan, or the mystery of practice, because I invite people to inquire, in which we could think of as a kind of practice for sure.
Right.
To explore experience, definitely. But, you discover, it's a discovery that what you're looking for is here. It's just maybe being overlooked, and
that's a nice soft way to put it. I sense that discovery or exploration, practice just has a connotation for a lot of people of requirement, but when you put it as a discovery or an exploration, it kind of opens that up a little bit. So And
Yeah.
I think that's a nice soft way to put it.
Yeah. I even have a chapter in my last book about I think it's called over dramatizing the path.
Mm.
And, which is often made out to be this incredibly like arduous sort of heroic undertaking and overcoming like all this stuff. And fine, it can be experienced that way for sure. But I invite people in the book to just like take this up as a very lighthearted, playful, curious, not such a heavy undertaking, but like, wow, it's like science, it doesn't have to be a heavy thing. It's like, let me just be curious like a child, because we have that within us. We never really lose that curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
It's just built in, I think, to the very fabric of life, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
So it's operating all the time in a way, like this is the expression of curiosity now is our conversation. Like it's just life curious about itself and exploring itself, and making that a little more explicit and intentional can be of great benefit for sure, as I think it has been in my own life, certainly. And but yeah, to keep that kind of, I don't know, the playfulness of it, I think it feels like that is a quality of life itself in a way, that playfulness.
It's an equivalent of gravity. It's just built in.
Feels that way to me.
I don't really have anything to say except, like,
yeah.
It just seems to be that way. It really does. And the softer, more playful and light we allow it to be, where's the problem?
Yeah. I mean, and that's a lot of my work really centers around, discovering, like I say, I was just talking about this. I do a weekly Zoom meeting, and I just came out of that before our discussion. And somebody was asking some stuff that was weighing on them pretty heavily. And and I said, there's kind of, when it comes to problems and problem solving, there's two approaches to it. One is at the level of the seeming problem itself and address it there, right? Like if I have a headache, that feels like problematic, it's painful, it's uncomfortable, I want to do something about it, I address it at the level of the headache and take steps to try to mitigate it, right? And that could be true of whatever, a relationship issue or a geopolitical issue or whatever, right? And I said, that's great. And, we're all doing that in our own ways, probably, and as a function of living these lives. And then there's another approach to problems, which is to discover that they don't exist, actually. That's a really different approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. That they're like literally, not just poetically, literally defined into existence by the way life seems to be, basically, descriptively.
That which perceives of a problem just might be the problem.
It's both the presumed perceiver and also what's being perceived, because we see the both, right? Because it's like there's that whatever, that state of mind that's problematic, I've put it in the category of negative, afflictive, whatever, that something has to be done about. And so I'm just constantly like inviting people, like, well, let's take a look at what it actually is, because language is so powerful. Like we have all these words, the whole dictionary filled with words, and it really does seem like the words are able to capture things. Otherwise, why do we even have the words? I mean, we would just never, right? If they didn't have some utility to capture what's going on here, right? So we have words. I have a word for that thing outside my window. Well, there's the window, that's a word, and the thing outside my window, a tree. And yeah, that's a window and that's a tree. I can distinguish them, and I have words to convey those distinctions to some degree. And definitely seems like that's what's going on. And the same with my so-called internal experience. I've got this diversity of phenomena happening experientially, subjectively, that I seem to have names for, like thoughts and feelings and sensations. And within each one of those, all the multitude of feeling states and thought states and sensorial experiences, right? And this goes on and on and on. And it's just a big, giant, mostly untested assumption we have as humans that we, in fact, have figured it out,
right?
Because we have language. And it's
Certainty.
like, have we?
The death of curiosity is certainty.
Right. Yeah.
There's a clue there, because certainty, it puts us in a position where we start overlooking it. I'm certain of this. I'm no longer examining this. There's an assumption that this is fixed, that this is permanent. So now I'm no longer examining and I'm projecting further away. And so when we say it's right here, take a look at those certainties, because those are the things that are just being glazed over.
Right. Right. That's like our final conclusion of what it is, and that this is what it is. And
it's finite.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
It's the death of experience is certainty.
Right.
Because then it
makes it seem that way.
Imposing on us all the time. And then, so what if you get curious again? Is there anything imposing? Is anything happening to us?
Right. It's interesting because all the layers upon layers upon layers of certainty and interpretation and conclusion that we have about this that's happening, they don't actually, it makes it seem as if it creates the constriction and sense of finiteness and smallness and limit, and it very much seems that way, but it doesn't actually. We never really pull it off, even though it seems that we do. Like we think that we've succeeded at squeezing infinity into our boxes of knowledge, but no, it will not be squeezed. It just will not. And discovering that is, to me, that's what freedom is about, is discovering that this is unsqueezable into anything. And
yeah,
it's really, in a way, it's the end of certainty.
And the negotiation too. The negotiation that seems to be taking place on a regular, very subtle level for most of us.
Negotiating with our experience, you mean? Yeah. Why are we negotiating? Because we think we know what it is, and it needs to be negotiated, right?
Yes.
I know what that is. That's a problem. I got to negotiate with it. I've got to figure out how to, I got to rearrange all this stuff so that I can be okay, so that life is in order, right? That's all assuming that I actually know what all this stuff is that I'm trying to navigate and negotiate, right? But I don't actually know what it is.
It's all that assumption. I really appreciate you bringing that word to the conversation, because it's, even emotional states like this is sadness. It's just an assumption. What is it actually go into it? Is it, can you demonstrate that this is the same that may have historically been in the past? Is this the same exact sensation? Is this the same experience? And then that curiosity, that's it. It can take you everywhere. The window. Well, is it a window? What is window? There's an assumption with what this is. Now, new exploration. Tree. Okay, a tree, a fixed thing. Well, no, that's an assumption. How do I, and it seriously starts to become, it's almost like an acclamation of something that's always been present. We just kind of reconcile with that curiosity. And then it feels like it has its own inertia. And suddenly we are taken somewhere.
Right.
So the part where we go, who is being taken somewhere?
Or we could say, I'll say when we explore what we think we know things to be with our certainty and our assumptions of what things are, and then we actually explore it, we end up like, you look at something and you have some idea of, like, you've got some fixed notion of what it is, and just a little exploration reveals you're basically lost. Like, you have no idea where you are, because you have no idea where you are. Like, you've lost track of where you are because you just went into the the infinitely endless fractal of this, which, it's literally like that. It's literally like, I don't know if you've seen these if you're on Instagram, but I just happened upon this very cool account on Instagram. It's something like Art Viral or something. I'll send you, if you're on Instagram. It's so mind-blowing. But people have created this, I don't know how they do it, but it's like this art where it feels like reality to me, where you're doing this thing, how you can, like, make your screen bigger, and it's like they keep going in. It's like there's like this like a piece of bark on a tree, and like they're zooming into the bark, and you realize, oh my God, there's like this little person like sitting in there like sewing or something. And then like they zoom into like the needles that the person's sewing, and there's like a whole world inside those needles. And then you go into that world, and it's so mind-blowing. Like that someone was able to create this graphically and visually, but it's kind of like that. It's like that's what exploring reality is like to me.
Yeah.
You just keep going in. There's a world, and then you think there's a world, and you, well, what is that world? And you explore that world. It opens into another world, and then it's just, you can just keep exploring as long as you want. You'll never get to the end because there is no end. So that's why there's no final conclusion, because you don't get eureka. I got to the end. This is what it is.
John, this is kind of a beautiful like reformation of a practice that in one-on-ones, there's this mention sometimes of zooming in, yet putting it in that particular perspective, that really kind of makes it more vivid for someone as they zoom in.
Right. Discovering the worlds upon worlds upon worlds. And
in a sensational experience, that's absolutely the case.
Yeah. It's just,
I always say, find that line, find the boundary between where that apparent sensation is and what something else is. Go right to that spot and zoom in. And then they find themselves in a completely different space there. And I'm like, is there a boundary? Yeah, it seems so. Okay, go to that boundary. And then they just keep going. And I'm like, can you actually find any defining line? Is there a demarcation anywhere? And it's pretty remarkable.
It is very remarkable. And it's like, it's all right under our nose, so to speak, that we're living that reality, actually. Like we are that. We're not just living it. We are that fractal infinity. Everything about us that we might think of as ourselves, thoughts, feelings, sensations, personality characteristics, the body, the whole gestalt that we think somehow the self is constituted of some sort of unique combination of all those things. All of that is a funny thing. It's the hologram. You always end up in the same place, no matter what you look at. If you look at the self, or you look at the tree, or I look at you, wow, I'm suddenly in the same place, which is not really a place. It's just, well, of course, you're left ultimately with silence, in the sense of not like silence as absence of sound, but the silence of this not collapsing into anything that could be said, silence, that it just has there's actually no narrative there, which is really wild. Like this has no intrinsic narrative. It just is not, but it's extraordinary how, people talk about like the nothing being everything. And often when I hear people talk sort of in those terms, you hear teachers talk about it, it's like, for me, my taste, at least in terms of teaching this stuff, is there's not a lot of explicating what exactly do you mean by that. It sounds lovely, potentially. It could sound horrifying, I guess, too. Nothing being something, or totally perplexing. And maybe it's enough to snap someone into certain kind of understanding. But I definitely spend a fair amount of time in my work, funny enough, defining terms, in the sense of like, okay, if I say it's empty or it's nothing, what do I actually mean by that? What is that referring to as an actual experience? And it refers to just what you and I are talking about, that you keep looking and you never come to a point where, oh, there it is. Like I've identified what it is, whatever the experience is, or the self. I never arrive at the bottom of the well where I've landed on the determination or the certainty of what it is. It's like, no, it's just the free fall. And that's my understanding of what nothing is. It's just not a void. It's just not a thing that can be pinpointed. It can be identified, right? That's the basic notion of emptiness. All dharmas are empty of self nature, that they don't have a self in the sense of they don't have an identity. Like you have, it's very paradoxical, because you have and the people that know you better, we're just meeting for the first time, would say, yeah, I kind of know Josh. He has kind of a feel to him. He has sort of a flavor, a kind of a signature that makes Josh and not someone else, right?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
My
But of
partner
course,
says it's like waking up to someone different every day.
there you go. Well, that's maybe your flavor, is that the diversity of you, you know. But whatever it is, it can feel on the one hand, like certainly visually, like, you know, your partner can identify you and your friends and your family can identify you.
Mm.
But like you were saying about, you know, memory, it's like without only referring to memory, when there's an automatic kind of referencing of memory that we can't help. It's built into, that's how I can recognize you in a sense from moment. It's like, it's not like you're suddenly like, I've never seen you before. I've never seen you before. I've never seen you before. Right. So
Yeah.
somehow there's this weird, like rapid fire referencing of memory. It's the only thing I can figure, because otherwise it would be like every flash instant you're in a world you've never existed in before. Like literally everything is never before seen when there's not that reference point. But it's weird because in a very real way, that is what we're encountering. Like we've been chatting for whatever, half an hour. But right now, like this moment in a sense stands on its own with no prior reference point. So in that sense, it's like we're meeting for the first time, for the first instant, like everything being met for the very first time. And I mean, that's incredible how our seeming knowledge of things, like what they are, like you were saying, the window or whatever, it really does rest upon memory, doesn't it?
It's a perception of time, memory.
It really is. Because if I had no access to memory and I look at what I'm calling the window, I'm not going to see a window. I'm going to see something, let's say. I'm going to perceive something, presumably. But I don't have that category to put it in to know what it is. It's literally like I just happened upon something I've never seen.
There's no separation in reference. Yet that this can happen sometimes. Something is known but not known, or something is known but not referenceable. And memory doesn't seem to accompany that sometimes. There was about a 2.5 year period. I don't know.
Where you found yourself not referencing memory very much, you mean?
Looking back, it felt like maybe 6 weeks or 4 weeks had gone by, and it was 2.5 years. Angelo's like, "Where you been?" And I'm like, "What do you mean? You know, hasn't been that long." So asking the family, "Hey, what was the last few years like?" And they're like, "Oh, you know, baseball games and amusement parks, just like the huge." But there wasn't a recording happening with that whole experience in time. There was no like referencing. And I'm like, was there like sudden senses that I had no idea what was going on or anything? And they said, no, seemed pretty normal.
So people were not experiencing you necessarily that differently in terms of your interactions with them?
The outer experience seemed to be exactly the same, but there was like no remembering of an inner experience at all.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's a paradox because it seems like externally really nothing really changes abruptly, but something like this internal center of attention seemed to have gone flipped inside out.
But you weren't having the experience, at least as much as you could remember it now, because it happened however long ago. It wasn't like you were like looking at something and like, because I'm picking up the glass of water and it wasn't like, what is this? It wasn't like that, not accessing memory.
Yeah, I'm not, I don't know. Probably not.
Probably
because
not.
They probably would have noticed something was going on.
Yeah, because it would be, at least logically speaking, if there was no capacity to reference, for consciousness to reference memory, it would be like, you'd be starting over like every instant. Like you would, everything would be like never done before. It was like everything would be, I'm just imagining.
How do pants come on, right?
What are pants? Do these go here or do they go here on top of my head?
What's this sensation? And then you're urinating.
Right, exactly. That's what I mean. Yeah.
That's a complete lack of orientation. What it seemed like was something worked out on its own entirely. It was like a complete flow, a space of flow. So there was part of something that must have been able to function, but it didn't have this constant referencing apparently. like self-referencing. Like there was no more question of how this fits into anything. It just kind of happened.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense because in a very real way, there's certainly that aspect or a kind of perspective. I talk about perspectives all the time. And from one perspective, that is very much what's going on now, that it's like the moment, if you want to call it the moment, like now, this instant is completely free of any history. Even if there's something called referencing the past, like an ordinary kind of human thing we do, even what we're calling referencing the past isn't referencing the past, because there's not a past to reference, because it's gone.
There's nothing there. We're literally making it up.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely.
It's an imagination.
Yeah, the thoughts are always referring to something. Thought is always referring to something that's not here.
So, John,
yeah,
can we talk about confirmation bias? Because we're heading right into that. And this is what seems to show up. It seems like when a belief or some kind of referencing mechanism is in place, it's just looking for ways to fill the gaps constantly. It's like a pseudoscientist out there already forming a conclusion and looking for any tidbit of evidence to fit that conclusion. So I have a broken picture frame, let's say, and I'm looking at this broken picture frame, and all of a sudden I'm referencing something that's memory. And I'm like, oh yeah, remember when we moved and it fell off the wall, and when it hit the ground, it broke. But actually, none of that, there's none of that here at all. There's only a broken picture frame. So how could we possibly know? How could we prove? How could we have that it fell off a wall ever? Maybe we're just making it up. There's actually no way to actually know that. That's where the confirmation bias with belief seems to show up for a lot of people. If they believe that part of existing is suffering, they've already made the negotiation and they're going to find it.
Yeah. Now, confirmation bias is, I've also teach psychology and graduate students in psychology. They're training to be therapists, even though I'm not a therapist. And I talk about confirmation bias quite a bit in my classes. I teach a research class, and it's central to the beginning of how I open up the class, because I say, we have the way we come to know what things are is often very much driven by this desire to have our assumptions about things confirmed. And so we're seeking out, that's what we're seeking out, confirmation. Or if we encounter something that's disconfirming of the way we think it is, we'll either rationalize it away, we'll overlook it, we can't somehow incorporate that, because if we let it come in, then suddenly the frame of reference is shattered and our assumptions are like, sorry, it's not that way, right? No, and I talk about how, gosh, you can look in any area of life. I mean, I say politics is maybe one of the most powerful dimensions of human experience, where the confirmation bias is brightly shining, because if you just listen to people debate politics, you have very little in the way of, like, let's say you and I were on CNN or MSNBC or Fox or whatever, and we're debating some topic about whatever, let's say the current thing going on in Israel and Hamas. And so we're coming with our points of view, let's say, and we have very different perspectives on it. And you start telling me your perspective, and I'm like, am I really truly open to the possibility that I don't have the whole story here, like that my frame of reference is only partial? Rarely does it seem humans operate that way. It's more like, I already have this ironclad like idea. And I mean, you never hear people, like, I'll say to my students, when's the last time you turned on news and you heard someone going, Josh, I really want to hear your perspective on this. Like, there might be something for me to learn from your perspective.
Yeah, educate me.
And, and then I'll share my perspective with you. And then we'll like inform it's like very, very rare, isn't it?
I
almost to be like non-existent in.
Yeah. There's nothing that shows up as if that exists.
It's rare. And yet it's like, it's ironic because this is interesting. It's very much related in some ways to what I'm teaching in terms of the whole kind of non-duality world, which is that if there's any prerequisite for my explorations that I'm inviting folks into, is even some amount of openness to the possibility that you don't already know what this is.
Yes. Here's these cards get created sometimes. And one of them says, live under the softness of maybe. Just experiment with that for a while. Just everything is maybe. Just let everything be a maybe and just see what shows up. You know? Oh, that's my car. Maybe. Everything. Play with it and see what happens.
Yeah, it's like everything's a hypothesis. It could be.
Yeah. Because even that right there is a little bit of like a opportunity for light to kind of shine through some cracks.
Yeah. And, when it comes to like this distinction we've been highlighting between, on the one hand, thinking we know what experience is, it is very much like the political commentator that thinks they already know what A, the cause of the conflict is, and B, how to resolve it, let's say, or maybe C, it's not resolvable very easily. And so they've already kind of made up their mind, right? But we have the in just our lives, we live with this same kind of seeming certainty, right? That, okay, not only am I certain like what my experiences are, at least the ones I have names for, like I know, this thing that's arising right now is anxiety. So first, I know what it is. And second, not only do I know what it is, but I know it's a problem. And I have to fix it.
I know I have to do something about it. That's where it gets really
I have to negotiate with it, as you were saying. I have to navigate it somehow. I have to.
And
right?
It's like a compulsive action, constantly distracting from an engagement with, the benefit of sensations. Of course, it's still just a gateway, if you will, but the benefit of whatever this is it's pretty damn present. Even if there's a subtle interpretation happening there, you can't feel into the past, can't feel into the future.
No,
it's not reflective. It's kind of pretty spontaneous. Spend some time with that.
Absolutely.
Could demonstrate quite a bit.
No, I mean, that's what I talk about all the time, that if you just investigate whatever the language is referring to and imagining that it has accurately determined what it is, this is a whatever, a thought, a negative thought, a difficult emotion, whatever it is that we've defined. So that label, let's say my example of anxiety, so it's referring to something that's there, like that's being encountered. And again, because we assume that we've already figured it out, we're often like, I mean, it's very interesting when I invite people into the exploration, like I'm thinking my graduate students right now, because they're more naive as a rule to all this stuff. No one's ever said any of this to them for the most part. They're like, it's really like, it's a bit jarring sometimes, because it's really like, what do you mean I may not know what this is? Like, I'm convinced that I know what this is very strongly, right? And so I'm just like saying, well, maybe there's a possibility that you don't have the whole story yet about what it is. So let's just check it out, like scientists.
Yeah.
Right? Like, let's look and see, like, and I say, this is pretty basic. If you want to learn anything, you have to be willing to consider that you don't have all the knowledge yet. So let's look. Let's just come with that curiosity, again, that light, playful curiosity, and investigate our experience, because we can discover that it deviates from what we think it is in all these ways, all these amazing ways that reveal that the experiences are not only that are not what we think they are, but they're also, as a result of that, not the problems we imagine them to be. They're not the threats we imagine them to be. They're not the limitations we think we're living inside of. And that, again, that's the freedom from all of the language and the seeming implications of that language, because the language can often feel like this is a problem, this is lacking, this is limited, this is problematic, this is
painful,
this is evidence that there's something wrong with me, and on and on and on it goes.
Big one right there.
Yeah. And our experience is constantly revealing to us, if we just look, that all those assumptions don't hold up under scrutiny. Just don't hold up. It's like, wow. So isn't that funny? Like, we want that. I mean, maybe I explore on my classes with confirmation bias. Why does the human seem to cling so fiercely, even to the point of being willing to kill other humans over our ideas,
or oneself,
right? What is that? Like, what's the driving? Why does it seem so challenging to open up to the possibility that we don't know what this is? And I mean, it's speculating, but I guess at some whatever neurobiological organismic level, all those notions that I know what this is bring a certain kind of security or sense of safety or sense of like I can just kind of rest because like this is the way it is. And I have my certainty, right? I kind of hang out in my certainty, and it provides a kind of resting place of sorts. But I think because reality is constantly, actually, without our appreciating it maybe much of the time, it's constantly like saying, actually, this isn't that certain. It isn't that certain. And so why do we defend our points of view? Because it's like, if we were really so certain, we might not need to defend the points of view, right? But they're hiding. My longtime friend Adya likes to say that, how did he put it? Our beliefs are our defense against uncertainty.
Yes.
We're living with the uncertainty. And like the way I defend against that is I take on certain beliefs, because that helps me to get rid of my uncertainty.
It posits a permanent experience in an impermanent experience. And I mean, exactly. a belief by itself is actually painful. And most people don't even see that. Just even holding the belief actually hurts, because there's the reality's pressing against what seems to be permanent all the time on its own.
That's beautifully put. Yeah. I think there's a lot of truth to that, like you say, it's like the in our face impermanence that this has no continuity to it. Is constantly pressing up against all of our ideas about the way this is. But again, we often don't realize that.
We have to move into an effort of resistance against reality as it is to maintain this artificial state of safety, familiarity, comfort, certainty. And that efforting is a motion from stillness, which stillness is just being in this as it is. I mean, that's the best way to put it. Just being in the midst of it. And so if we're putting effort against that which we actually can't push against, it's going to hurt. Have you ever seen a little kid at a wave pool, like one of those big wave pools, and a little kid stands up to that wave and it's just like, wham.
Yep.
That's us. When I have a belief, boom, all the time.
Yeah. It's ironic. It's kind of a sad, what you would feel tragic, though understandable irony, right? Because we're taking on the beliefs out of that impulse for well-being, because we think they're going to bring us that sense of comfort and ease, and right, because I guess at one level, the staring into the abyss of uncertainty feels like
overwhelming.
Like, what do you mean that I can't know what this is? Like, that sounds, at first glance, it can sound terrible. Like,
well, it sounds like death.
Right. Yeah.
And I think when we're really young, whatever maybe seems to be going on with forming symbolic language and identity starts to happen. And whenever we're feeling these really intense sensations, I think we're actually looking around to see if anybody else is sharing that experience. And it feels really personal and contained. And it doesn't seem like anybody else is sharing it. So then it's like, oh, it's got to be me. That's where the beginning of this, it's my fault, or something must be wrong with me because it's only happening here. And then this might actually kill me. And then the identity says, I'll protect you from that forever. Let's just keep you busy. Let's keep you doing something away from that sensation. Let's do everything we can to pull you from feeling that, because the identity can't know it. And so that's scary to the identity too. And so it's like this running from death in a way that.
What do you think that there's something, what is it, do you think about the sensation or the experience that is perceived as threatening?
I think we're just so raw and sensitive, we as young children, that it just feels so immense. Like we're actually feeling the immensity of this universe. Right. And when there becomes a reflector there and we start kind of reflecting on it, that says, that's too much. That's overwhelming. Right. That's just too much. And then we have secondary experiences that could be relatively traumatic, let's say. I don't know. Get in trouble, or maybe parents are going through a divorce. And because the mind is always looking for a cause, effect, and origin to everything, it starts looking out here to make sense of this situation. And then it just, for some reason, is not coming about. But then that huge sensation is arising. And then it goes, boom, that's the cause of all of this. And then we go, it's my fault. Something's wrong with me. I'm broken. I'm unlovable. Whatever the conclusion is there. It's like shame seems to be the hinge of all of this, whatever this is. This is the origin of all this disaster externally. It started here. So this is why I think a lot of kids blame themselves for their parents' divorce, because they can't find an origin or a cause or effect out here. But something arises here and they go, that's it. That's what caused this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about this earlier when we were talking about, there's this term, the narrative fallacy, like in kind of cognitive science, of where we're looking for a narrative to explain, like we're looking to piece this together into some kind of explanation. We're looking for correlations, like how does this, how can I explain this? Like what's related to this? What caused this? But it's very interesting because on the one hand, that takes a lot of work, although it's also, consciousness does it pretty effortlessly at a certain point. It's constantly just finding these connections seemingly between this and that, how this is causing that. But I guess that looking for how it all is funny, because it's like looking to how to fit this all together into some sort of explanation, right? Whatever it is, whether it's my existential existence or what happened with my health or my parents' relationship, or it's a kind of an interesting question though, like, because in another way, to see that it doesn't have an easy explanation, maybe ultimately no explanation, is very freeing. It's so much lighter in a way to feel that so much. It's really relieving to see that. Again, I think at first glance, I can feel like anything but relieving, because it's like, where is the answer? Where is the answer? But I don't know. It's interesting how, it's like, I think an aspect of it is that it's like we're really having to prop that up in a sense, because it isn't actually the way reality is. It's like there really isn't an answer. There really isn't a resolution to this. There's not actually something to resolve. Which is really wild. There's not something to resolve. and yet it looks like there's a lot of stuff that needs resolution, that needs explanation, that how does this fit to that? And at the level of this, what I call the seemingly describable world, it kind of is that way, like, again, if you
reality.
Yeah. I mean, it's like it's like if something's broken, I'm looking for the answer to why it's broken and how I can fix it, and nothing wrong with that. That's part of life. It's just only part of the story, right?
It seems, yeah. I mean, when you pointed to fractals, there was a pretty intense meditation experience maybe a few months ago. This one, for some reason, it's probably made up in the moment because there's no way to verify this, but it was as if I somehow had become time itself. And what it felt like was an infinite flowing into a tiny singularity and a flowing out like this. But it was fractals upon fractals upon fractals upon fractals. Everything was this. It was just paradox. Everything at its most fundamental was paradox. And yes, there is relative reality. And because of the binary nature of the mind, it says this is form and this is everything is form. And what we do is we skip out on the fact that there's also this absolute reality where everything is formless. There's like nothing here. But somehow they are the same reality and somehow seem entirely different.
Well, what you were just describing as, yes, exactly. And that description of that meditation experience, it's always interesting when you look at, now it was particularly like seen in with a certain kind of vividness, what you were describing, but what you were describing is exactly what's going on right now. Like the disappearance of time, the fact that, I mean, how long is this moment here for, right? It's unfindable, right? It's like a 0 point.
Unfindable, unknown.
And yet, so there's like literally no time. You say, well, how could anything be here if there's no time for anything to appear? But here is the appearance of life. So that's, like you just said, like that's the paradox, is that this timeless, nothing has any duration whatsoever because there's no time. And here's the flow of time. Right? Like we're living that flow of time in another way as well. And there's no dichotomy. It's like it's one reality that can be experienced in both ways, but we're so accustomed to only the time and space describable reality, like of things and phenomena, that we're just innocently sort of not as aware of or overlooking like this other one that's actually, like you said, the impermanence is staring us in the face, that the fact that the moment cannot be grasped hold of is like so obvious. It doesn't take 20 years on a meditation cushion to see that. Just look.
The formlessness seems to have such a subtlety to it that it's like, it's almost, here's a fun way to describe it. Frame rates, like when you're doing video or whatever, there's actually small gaps where there's nothing there and then another frame and then a small gap. It's almost like as if the mind is perceiving the frame itself, but not really perceiving that very thin line in between. Yet it doesn't mean that thin line in between does not exist. And so it's being overlooked. And yet there is a way to get access to that thin line right there simultaneously, instead of just falling into, oh, this is the frame. This is the frame.
What's so weird is that thin line, as you're calling it, is the only thing you're actually experiencing.
Right.
Because
that's it.
Anything else is an abstraction.
Right.
Right. You have to refer to something that was.
Reference. It's a reference.
It's a reference. And we do that, and it's part of life, right? Like, but again, in one sense, there's no experience, and yet there is. Because here, there's this, and this is here. This is clearly, like, I don't know your sense of this, but to me, like, there's a lot of discussion, obviously, in spirituality, as waking up out of the dream of form, the dream of identity, the dream of describability. And I actually think we could say there is such a thing, but now we've just described something called waking up. We just put it to a frame of reference.
Yeah.
And so in one very real sense, there's no escaping the dream. All there is dreaming. There's no referenceless, frameless. There's just, because that would just be another frame. There's always, and I'm not a Buddhist, but the Buddhist tradition says something similar, that the emptiness always looks like something. The emperor's never naked, fully naked. It's like, it always looks like, and that's certainly my experience. Like, it's, even if you feel those moments like you did, where it's, in a sense, it's like everything's gone, the line's so thin that to be non-existent, that's the no thing, which we're experiencing right now. What does it look like? It looks like this. It looks like the vivid display. It's like there's no, it's really interesting. It's like I've just been playing a lot with this recently, that the whole thing about awakening is actually part of the dream.
Well, I mean, there's no way to know, right?
Right.
So
I mean, in other words, I say that only in the sense of calling it anything, whether I call it dreaming or awakening from the dream, is to take this and collapse it into something seemingly frameable. I mean, countless conversations going on about awakening and what it is and the various dimensions of it. And that can be informative and have a certain kind of reality to it and validity to it, and be of support to people who are navigating life and navigating the journey of so-called awakening. But in another way, it's like,
it's just clues.
It's tricky from my standpoint. What's tricky about those conversations is that even if unintentionally, and people have come to me and asked this question not infrequently when they hear people talking about the way sort of the awakening journey is kind of structured in some sense. I was just listening to a discussion with 3 different non-dual teachers talking about this. And as I'm listening, it's like, at one point, one of the people said, like, well, everything that I'm saying about the way this is structured and unfolds in a human may not have any bearing to the way reality actually is. You know, it kind of said that. I was like, okay, I'm kind of with you on that one, because this is where I just find reality just constantly leaving me, in a sense, is I just can't really tell you how it is. I really can't. And so I'm kind of,
it's a game.
It's like, and what I've noticed is that it can happen to people, and that some of the people reaching out to me were like, well, I hear the way it seems people talk about it, the way it's structured, or the different sort of dimensions of it, or like clues to kind of how it might be unfolding for people. It's what's so tricky about that, just from the pedagogy of teaching, you know, how teaching happens, and not that there's any formulas to any of this, because I know there's not. But I have observed the tendency that people have to hear those things. And then what do they start to do? They start to look at their own experience and try to figure out, try to assess, try to measure where they are on the scale. You know, like, how am I doing relative to what I just heard about?
Absolutely.
It's unfolding process. It's really hard for people to not take it that way, I think, and then start wondering where they are in the hierarchy, and are they measuring up to where the teacher is on the hierarchy? And that stuff is,
they're looking for another confirmation to a bias that's present as a conceptual.
Right.
But this is the card that shows up.
Yeah.
Maybe this will help for some people that are listening to this video.
Yeah.
There is no truth but your truth, whatever it is. Just make sure that that's true. Endlessly make sure that that's true. Then there's no confirmation bias. It's pretty damn spontaneous and immediate.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's like, we can say things like this, very interesting too, about as it relates to even science in a way, which is we can talk about how things tend to be, even outside of the context of awakening, spirituality, non-duality, or whatever. People will talk about, you know, let's say developmental stages. And, you know, at this stage, this is how the person tends to be. Tends to be what's happening cognitively, mentally, emotionally, and so on. And or you talk about like personality types. This is how people tend to be, or Enneagram types, or those can be wonderful things to play with and can be potentially illuminating and informative. And they can be incredibly misleading at the same time, because I don't know, Josh, you can't be put into any box, because you're infinity. You're unresolvable infinity through and through and through and through and through and through. So then it becomes kind of almost funny, like, really, like, I'm going to type you
the game
and talk about where you're at in your own unfolding. Like, I was thinking about this the other day. Like, I can't actually assess where I am because I can't assess where anything is because this is not measurable, right? So then it becomes a so interesting, like process of,
That's why when I
determining.
hear like people really investing in stages, and I'm like, there's no stages. In fact, there is no awakening. There's only this. Awakening is just an anticipation for something that is overlooking this.
Right. Or you could say if there is an awakening, it is this.
Yeah. What is not?
Not something that happened last week or 20 years ago.
It's not an event. It's not a state. It's everything.
Yeah, you could say it's the very nature of reality itself is, it's awake. It's all the kind of earmarks or hallmarks of the awakening experience or insight are present as each moment. In fact, they're present nowhere else because anything else is a reference to history, which isn't actual, which is really interesting. Like, which isn't to say you and I, if we have another conversation sometime, we're just hanging out and we're telling stories about our lives and what's unfolded in our lives, both in this context, but also just whatever, our relationships, our families. And we do that. And there's something lovely about it. And it's beautiful. It's incredible.
It's human.
It's human. It's so human.
Be all the way human. Just see what it's like to be all the way human, all the way authentic human. Start there. And then who knows, something might start to really slap you in the face.
Yeah. It's so interesting because it's both just living with that, like I could tell you about my life and it would have a certain kind of reality and truth to it. And it would be my life, the story of my life. And, but in another way, it's like when I go to look, it's just, you just burst out in laughter because it's like,
what?
My life? Like, are you kidding me? Like, how about let's talk about like what's going on today, and the infinite fractal that, to forget about today. What about this moment that you and I are meeting in, this moment, which is the only moment there is? Like, it's right. It's like, okay, let's write a book about this moment. How many pages do you have? An infinite number of pages. Just like that artwork I was telling you about, it's just you keep going in and in and in. It's like, here's the book of your life, in an infinite number of pages.
Have a fun
you can see why the Tao that begins with the true Tao cannot be named. It's like, what story are we going to tell about this that really holds up? None. But that's part of the beauty, is that it's just, to me, is that it's so magnificent in that it's not containable, as beautiful as the stories can be.
And this is the fun about the story, is it belongs, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has any substance. It's just kind of a form of play in itself.
Yeah. Well, it of course is made of, it is a funny thing, the thoughts, let's say, are not only thoughts. They're also, everything transcends itself. So the thought is not, we think about the thoughts, the boogeyman, gets us into all the trouble of identity and, right, believing X, Y, or Z. But thoughts aren't actually thoughts.
No.
So
it's emptiness.
It's this beautiful, radiant emptiness as well. So like from that standpoint, it's like what we think of as the problem that has to be overcome is not actually a problem to overcome.
That's the fixation, is that there has to be a problem. And so what people do is they replace what seems to be external problem and they say, okay, now thought's the problem. There's always has to be a problem. And then I say, does there have to be a problem?
Yeah.
And when it's not a problem, we go, oh, okay. And then something shifts, at least it seems to. And it just seems to be stepping into stillness, which is no longer an effort against this as it is. So maybe there still is something here, but at least we don't have to fight it. That's all.
Yeah. This image came to me about, speaking of fighting experience, which is, one of our human pastimes, struggling with our experience. And I was working with someone individually yesterday, And I think I forget what it was they were dealing with. I think it was like anxiety. And the image came to me, which has never come to me before, of like a really, really heavy boulder. And the boulder's sitting there on the ground. It's like a 2-ton boulder. And it's just sitting there, right? And so that boulder's really heavy, but it's only heavy if I push against it or I try to lift it up.
Yeah.
It has no weight until I give it weight.
I love it. I love it.
And it's incredible, isn't it? So simple, but there's something about it just hit me like on every level, like how, so something arises in your experience that you think of as a problem just habitually that needs to be solved. And so what do? We're push against it. We're trying to overcome it. We're literally trying to lift it up. Effort. And suddenly it feels heavy. It feels overwhelming. It's like, and you can see the power of like leaving it alone completely is like leaving the rock alone, and suddenly it's weightless. It's not an obstacle until we push against it.
That's it. The certainty of action seems to be this compulsive thing that shows up. There's a certainty that something has to be done about this. There's a cessation here. Something has to be done about this. There's a problem out here. Something has to be done about it. If we pull back layer by layer by layer, and we get to that, the way Adyashanti speaks of stillness, it's just something about it is so elegant, because it is usually first encountered for a lot of people in meditation, but it's a dynamic experience. This is all stillness. If we get to that place where we're no longer feeling compelled or compulsively or impulsively pushed away from just being immersed in this, then it has no weight.
Right. Exactly.
And that's it. But it's getting to that assumption and realizing that there's an assumption taking place that's very quick. That's it. Very quick. Be aware of it. And some of the best ways to do that is just be buried in sensation as often as possible. For some reason, it seems to give us a little bit of room to watch thought from a distance, just a little bit. And if we watch thought from a distance, we start to see where it wants to connect to a sensation and go, oh, this trigger that seems to be happening now has actually been an ongoing sensational experience that's being pushed against. Let's go to the beginning of that. What's before that? What's before that? What's underneath this? Where's the boundary here? Where's the boundary here? And then that, just like you said in the very beginning, that curiosity, nothing like it.
No, it's yeah. It's in a way it's simple, and another way we're often so accustomed to, again, sort of imagining that we have already figured it out, that if there's an obstacle, that's the only one in my book, which is we've already made up our mind that we've figured it out, that we know what everything is because of our language and concepts, then, it'll be more difficult to discover that, wow, it actually doesn't collapse into your ideas. It seems like it does, but it doesn't. And yeah, amazing.
I love that boulder metaphor is beautiful. It's perfect.
When it came, I was like, I mean, I've been talking about like this stuff for so long and I don't know why, but it was something about the heaviness of the rock, which, we think of as objectively heavy, but it's only in relationship to trying to move it that it becomes heavy.
Yeah. How do you know it's heavy if you're just looking at
it? Exactly. It's just there. It's just being.
Beautiful.
And it's actually completely weightless in a sense, we could say. It doesn't assume, like, we bring the heaviness into existence through our pushing against it. And it's like, wow, oh my God, that's just like our experience.
John, this actually could be an entire book, just that, because that can be explored in so many different ways.
Yeah, no, I mean, that practice, which is, very ancient practice of, I call the fine art of doing nothing, with experience,
Yeah.
It's
and
like,
it's not quite complacency.
No,
it's tricky because people go, oh, I can do nothing. And they,
right. Yeah. It's not quite that, because that's doing something, but like, yeah, it's just, don't pick it up. It's like, Is the other image that came to me the other day was like, is like experience feels like this breaking wave, this constant breaking wave. It's like you just allow the wave to break.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah,
it just breaks.
that's it.
That's it. I don't have to do anything about it breaking. It just breaks. And then another wave breaks, and then another wave breaks, so to speak.
That's it. I mean, that's it. I don't have to do anything about this.
I know.
And it takes us. That's another interesting aspect is, that wei wu wei flow state that can be very vivid. It's just, there are times where it's like, of all places, Walmart. Walking through Walmart, the body is moving, the head is on a swivel. I'm not doing, it's just like I'm along for the ride, and it's just happening. And I'm like, of all places, Walmart? Okay.
That God's there too.
I mean,
God's at Walmart and everywhere.
I mentioned that a few people. I'm like, just go to Walmart, you'll find it there. I mean, they roll back.
That's your power spot. Forget about Sedona and Mount Shasta. And it's like the Wailing Wall. It's like, no, I'm going to Walmart. That's where the Shakti is.
I mean, they're going to roll back that awakening just like their prices. Trust me on that.
It's so funny. I know we have all these concepts in the spirituality, like, like you get the transmission, like from the teacher, right? This concept we have. And it's like, oh man, it's not that that's wholly untrue, but the transmission is the transmission of reality.
Yep.
And that is a 24/7 transmission. That is what you're experiencing now. You're experiencing the transmission of reality. You are that transmission. So there you go. No teacher required.
It seems as if sometimes being with another person gives us permission to let the management go, and then we tap into the transmission immediately. But then the mind goes, it's because of this other person. There is no sanctuary. It's everywhere.
Yeah. I remember I had this, it actually, right, exactly. It's even in Walmart is a sanctuary. Yeah. I remember when I was on this retreat 20 whatever years ago, and 22 years ago, and this, started to really hit me over the head, like in a really significant way, what we're talking about. And I remember it was almost like I saw how there was a sense of gratitude that arose very deep. And I could almost see how it wasn't that it went to some degree to the person facilitating the retreat. Like there was gratitude there. Like it felt like that somehow that it helped catalyze it.
Yeah.
But it was like I saw really clearly like where to really place the gratitude, which was on this. This wasn't only in the teacher or the facilitator. It wasn't any particular place. It was the gratitude for this, because this was it. I mean, this was, yeah. And that's like a less dicier place to place the gratitude in a sense.
Well, it's just more honest.
It's just more honest. It's more true. Yeah. It's like the experience is the teacher. Ultimately, reality is the teacher. The Sat Guru, the great guru is this, because this is doing everything. It is everyone. It is everything. It's the one doing the transmission, whatever transmission is. It's the one convening satsang, whatever that is. It's like, I mean, isn't like Walmart, I'm never going to forget that one, by the way, Walmart. It's like that's satsang in Walmart, that's the fellowship with truth, because there's nothing but fellowship with truth, because there's only the truth of what is, and we're always in fellowship with it, right? So it's just so funny to sort of take those kind of spiritual concepts and like, let's really look at them again. Like, let's really consider, what are we really talking about? The fellowship with truth. Like, yes, let's come together on my Zoom meetings and just revel in this. And it's so beautiful and juicy and mind-blowing. And just realize, like, yeah, that's where you always are. You are reveling in this with everything and everyone, Walmart and elsewhere, truly. I mean, it's not just poetry, right? It's like that really is what's going on.
Gratitude is such a powerful compass. I mean, without
It
a
is.
spinning needle, right? I mean, it doesn't tell us where we are, but it's an indication of presence.
Yeah, it is a powerful. Well, I teach a whole class on it in one of my graduate classes, and a whole evening that we dedicate to gratitude. And I
Beautiful.
say, even just in an ordinary human context, it's like I go, this is a fucking superpower. I'm telling you,
It is.
superpower, because I also teach a section 1 week on awe and wonder, and it has a lot of crossover with gratitude to me. But it's like a lens, you could call it this, of a way of perceiving life, like that everything, like just the constant streaming forth of gift. I mean, at the most basic level, you're being given the gift of reality, the gift of life itself, the gift of the consciousness that knows this reality, right? I mean, it's constantly here, this gift being given that makes all the other gifts possible. So it's just a matter of like, start looking at reality from that vantage, I say to my students, and your life will never be the same, because yeah, you've got all your stuff you're contending with as part of being a human life, living a human life. A lot of them are young and they're trying to make their way and find their way in life. And that's all real.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, you're surrounded 24/7 by sources of unending gratitude and awe and wonder. I mean, this is really, really the case. Just open your eyes. It's right there.
Sometimes I point a little bit closer to home and I say, do yourself a favor, after this call, when I'm doing a one-on-one or something, maybe go into like a non-distracted space and just observe your hand and just move each individual piece and really get that close and just look at how amazing the apparatus is. It's kind of cool. Like, look at it. And that can really get us in touch with gratitude.
Absolutely.
Wayne Dyer,
Absolutely.
he would talk about allowing that to wash over him before the feet touch the floor. And that's just every morning, that's just such a beautiful, gentle, easy way to tap into it.
No, it's incredible. I mean, it's like the miracle is everywhere, truly. I mean, and it's in your hand, and it's like looking at this, like you say, I mean, at every level of analysis, just visual, it's astonishing. Functionally, it's astonishing. It can touch, it can hold things. I mean, the aesthetics of it, the shape of it, the form of it, the mystery of it, we want it, right? One little thing that you're looking at, just your hand, right? That, I mean, what's the big deal? It's just a hand, but the whole universe is there.
How often do we examine that though? Because there's a certainty about what this is, what it's used for, and then it's just being used versus just spend some time with something close to home, And I love back to the boulder analogy is the only reason Sisyphus couldn't push that boulder up over the crest of the hill is because he was told ahead of time that he's doomed to do this every day. But eventually the boulder does kind of roll on its own.
Yeah. Or maybe it just sits there and then it is not a problem. It's just part of the the decoration of life.
Yeah. He wakes up.
There it is. That's there.
It's not heavy and it's just there. There you go, Sisyphus.
Exactly.
Take the day off, man.
You don't have to push it up the damn hill.
Yeah.
Who said you have to push it up the hill?
And even if they said it, like, how are they enforcing that anyway?
Right. Totally. Yeah. Who is the they anyway? Our commanders.
Beautiful. Man, thanks, John.
Yeah, it's lovely to chat with you.
Same.
Happy to have met you. It's delightful.
Very much so. Very mutual. This is wow. I have no idea what we spoke of yet. There was something energetically like just joyful and I don't know, just whatever these sensations are, they seem to be nice. So I appreciate you sharing that too.
Yeah, I just felt like, reveling in the wonder of this. That's how it feels.
A lot of fun.
A lot of fun.
Such a playful energy. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise.
Well, thanks for making this happen and just giving your time in this way. Really
Yeah,
do.
thanks for inviting the conversation. I'm glad we were able to do that.
Let's keep in touch. Let's chat again.
I'd love to. Sounds good. Thanks.
Well,
Ciao.
bye, John.